Okay, I am seeing a lot of people in this Idaho 4 case saying that the cell tower information listed in the probable cause affidavit doesn't really mean anything because he could have been pinging 20 miles away. So he could have been at his apartment in Pullman and pinging off the tower in Moscow. But let me show you something. If we look at the search warrants, we can see that just from what they received from the search warrants, before the FBI cast analyst even looked at anything, they can narrow down where he was at. So right after the murders, they did tower dumps. And this is one of the warrants. This was for AT&T. And if you notice right at the top, it says GPS coordinates and then distance from location, 0.5 miles, time 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. And if you read this, it says the unique identifiers for each wireless device that generated a timing advance, RTT and or LOC DBOR record within the search areas. Starting and ending date, communication with the network, the tower, and the sector, and the received radio signal for the device, estimated latitude and longitude along with confidence level. Now, the RTT and the timing advance is basically how they triangulate. That's the time it takes that ping to go from your device to the tower and back. This was another search warrant. This was for inland wireless. Same thing. They could narrow it down to a 0.5, half a mile search area, the GPS coordinates from 3 to 5. This was one for T-Mobile, 0.5 miles again, GPS coordinates. So they did tower dumps for all of the cell providers that have services in the area. And they were looking to see the phone numbers that communicated within a half mile of King Road. Now, unfortunately, Brian Kohberger's number was not in those tower dumps because they determined his phone was not responding from 2:47 a.m. until 4:48 a.m. But that would have helped them rule out people. So when I hear people saying, well, they didn't investigate anyone else, or how did they rule out other people? Those tower dumps are part of how they looked for anybody in the area and then were able to rule them out. But that also tells you that just from tower dumps, they can find out which phones were near the house. So we're not talking 20 miles away. They can narrow it down. Now, let's look at the warrant that they filed for Brian Kohberger's phone number. Okay, so this is the warrant that Brett Payne sought on December 23rd for Brian Kohberger's number. And if you look at this, it is for between November 12th, 2022 at 12 a.m. to November 14th, 2022 at 12 a.m. And they wanted all customer information. So they wanted telephone numbers, social security numbers, birth names, addresses, etc. That's to verify that it was his phone. The device purchase information. So when he bought that phone, we know from the PCA, he got a new plan in June of 2022. Email addresses, call detail records, and cell site information. So let's look at that closer. So we'll look at that. Cell site information to include all known cell towers associated with outgoing and incoming calls, call detail records. The information is to include any sector information, azimuth for each individual sector or identified sector, cell site location, handoff tower and sector, time on tower information, and any other related material that would be necessary to identify the location and sector in reference to the cell site information. And then cell site locations for all service provider cell sites, sector information, including azimuth headings and regional market associated with the requested cell site. Location information to include any estimated or known longitude and latitude of cellular device's current location or approximate location information received by the cell tower in reference to direction and distance from the tower a device may be located. Timing and triangulation information. radio frequency signal strengths, direction, and transmission information. The geographical constraints of location information will be limited to the United States. And then location information can be in the form of historical records. Now that's telling you that just from the AT&T records, before the FBI cast analyst even looked at anything, they were able to get things like longitude and latitude. They were able to triangulate before they even had to do any further research. So they already knew, just from the warrant information that came back from AT&T, how close he was to that house. Now, we know he wasn't going to ping within those 2 hours that the phone was not reporting. But we're talking about those 12 other times he was in Moscow. We're talking about that night before and after the murders. So when it says he pinged at Blaine, I've seen a lot of people going, well, he could have been at Hawaii and pinged at Blaine. Yeah, maybe that's kind of stretching the 20-mile limit. But the thing is, they can narrow it down before the FBI even looks at it. So if he was pinging at Blaine, he was close to Blaine. He wasn't clear over south of Pullman. And he also extended that warrant to get the data clear back into June of 2022. So they knew exactly whenever Kohberger went to Moscow, where he was in Moscow. They knew when he was in Pullman, where he was in Pullman. They knew when that phone got handed off to another cellular service, whether it was a partner service or AT&T services. And the other thing people have to understand is towers are not the only thing that you're pinging to. Okay, there's 8 registered towers that are over 20 feet tall, over 200 feet tall in Pullman and Moscow, but there's several more cell towers that are on light posts, on buildings. They're not the traditional tower. So they know exactly when he pinged into each one of those sectors. So as he was driving along Stadium Way, he would have pinged into different sectors. The handoff information would have been given to them by AT&T. And then the FBI cast analyst is able to look at that and narrow down even further. So the draft was used for the PCA, and what they're waiting for right now is the final report. Now, the final report is said to include the drive test. And what the drive test is where they equip a vehicle with special equipment that can measure each of the cell services, strength of signal, so the radius, like that 20-mile radius, or if it's less or more, the health of the equipment, anything that goes into the accuracy of that tower or cell service. So that final draft with the drive test is what they're waiting for. And the FBI is notoriously slow, but this also doesn't mean that they're withholding information. People need to understand the discovery process can go right up until before trial. It's an ongoing process. And I think Anne is trying to craft the alibi around holes in the prosecution's case. What she really shouldn't be allowed to do, and we'll see if Judge decides to throw the alibi out or not, because the prosecution did file the motion about that. But I think what she's trying to do is say, well, we know his phone wasn't reporting for those 2 hours, so prove that he wasn't at Hawaii Park. And so the prosecution's going to have to prove through video footage and where the phone was before and after that he was in Moscow. And I'll also show you that they did look into his physical phone as well. So here's the warrant for his physical phone after he was arrested. And they sent the warrant to the Moscow Police Department Forensic Lab. And that was to get all the information from his phone and a USB external hard drive that they also had. So we know that they dug into his phone after he was arrested. So what this means is Moscow police and then, of course, the FBI cast agent also had the specifics from his phone after they got it physically. So they could download everything on that to see if it matched up with the data they got from AT&T. And that's probably going to be coming in that final cast report as well, because at the time of the probable cause affidavit, they didn't have his phone. They just had the data from AT&T. So this is going to be whether Cy Ray can prove that he was in this other area, or Moscow police can prove he was in another area. And I said before, I think it's going to come down to video evidence. That car, that footage from 1112, and any other cameras around there. We know that there are cameras at several of the intersections in Pullman, several in Moscow, and also along Highway 270. So there are traffic cams all over the place. So it's going to be interesting at trial to see all that. But we also know, too, that we will find out at trial whether his phone was off, in airplane mode, or the battery was dead. Because once the Moscow forensics lab got a hold of that phone, they knew. So right now, everybody's still speculating whether it was off or not. We'll know at trial. One other thing I wanted to discuss was the UPS warrant. I keep seeing people saying that Kaylee was being delivered a package, and that's why there was the warrant for UPS. But if you read the UPS warrant, that's not what it was about. It was about video footage. Let's take a look at the warrant. Here's the UPS warrant. Notice it says any and all video that is recorded and stored on any delivery trucks that were in Moscow, Idaho between the dates of November 6, 2022 through November 14th, 2022. Okay, that warrant was not about a package being delivered. That's about video footage. They think that Kohberger's car was in some of that video footage. They had reason to believe that he was in that neighborhood when a UPS truck was over in Moscow. So that's to see if he was lurking around. Now, we know they said no stalking. We know he wasn't charged with stalking. And I wholeheartedly believe he was not stalking anyone specifically. I think he was casing the house. I've maintained that from the start. I think this was a situation like when Ted Bundy cased out the Chi Omega house, found that it had a faulty lock on the back door, and knew it was a vulnerable house. I believe he felt that house was vulnerable. He didn't care who lived in it. He was going to murder whoever was in it when he decided to make his move. And I believe that that UPS warrant was to see if that car was lurking around King Road during that time frame. But again, we'll find out at trial.